Bitcoin, as I say, is the magic mirror that exposes you to yourself. If you are not really that great character, Bitcoin will make you worse. And if you're basically a good character, Bitcoin will make you a better person. It accelerates who you are. And this is the thing about Bitcoin we all need to understand, is that the day of reckoning is coming, and you need to be right with Satoshi. Otherwise, you're going to get crushed by Satoshi.
Mr. Max Keiser, a true playable character in a sea of non-playable characters, someone that can actually critically think in a sea of people who cannot think. How are you, sir?
That's quite an introduction.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I feel elevated by it. I'm going to bring my A game to this interview. I'm not just going to say the same
Well, we got
old
$1.
shit
You can start
over
off.
and over again.
Well, exactly.
I'm going to stretch the
Stretch your
audience's mind,
stretch your imagination.
something new, something fresh.
Well, first off, let's start with Donald Trump.
What about?
You saw the speech today.
Yes.
What did you think?
Well, so you had some speeches at the event. You had Trump, you had RFK, and you had a few others. So I think what was surprising, I guess, is that RFK's speech had a lot more detail and a lot more kind of depth into it in terms of Bitcoin. Yeah. I think he's been orange-pilled harder, if you catch my meaning there. And Donald Trump came in, he got the executive summary and hit a few points. And it's good. It's great, because he is Donald Trump, and there's going to be a lot of impact on it. We can't ask for more. But if you're just saying, analyzing it, let's say word for word, note for note, I'd have to say RFK, seems to get it more.
Mm-hmm. I would say underwhelming. Trump's speech was very underwhelming, and I expected more, to be totally honest. And from as much as you can expect from a politician, I expected a lot more. So I think you nailed it. That's exactly, and a lot of people here too. I just talked to a lot of people. So what do you think it means, I guess, the Trump-Bukele relationship going forward? Presuming that Trump does win, which is not a guarantee, but what do you see going forward? Obviously, it's been a lot the last week or so. You've made a lot of noise, Bukele himself, Trump. Where do you see things going, though, truly, at the end of the day, if he does win, that relationship between those two countries?
The relationship between Trump and El Salvador and President Trump is excellent, and it was during his first term, and I'm sure it'll be excellent during his second term. The past week, there was some tension in the air and a bit of controversy for a couple of different reasons. I think that when President was speaking, he went off the cuff and kind of went on a sidebar and spoke extemporaneously about the situation at the border. Just in the past few days, a Salvadoran national attacked somebody in the U.S., and so this, triggered that kind of sentiment in his mind. And, he gets away with saying lots of stuff and not getting a lot of pushback. Mm-hmm. But in this case, I felt immediately that this would be an opportunity to actually push back a little. And then he doubled down and said something else, and people were like, hey, Max, you were right. This is not correct to be making these statements because they're materially wrong. They're factually incorrect. And he was suggesting that El Salvador is dumping violent criminals into the U.S. That's absolutely incorrect.
They're dumping their criminals into the United States of America, and we're not going to take it anymore.
The truth is that during the Clinton administration, they were dumping gang members from Los Angeles, MS-13, into El Salvador. And that became the gang problem in El Salvador. It was exported to El Salvador from the United States. And that story, I think, needs to be refreshed, that people understand that's the true story, and that the remarkable progress that's been made by President Bukele is even that much more remarkable. Number two, to give you more context, there was CPAC, and both President Bukele and Trump spoke at CPAC, and everyone was talking about President Bukele. He was the star of CPAC. And, Donald Trump, I think, feels a little jealous that the President Bukele is really the most popular leader in the free world. He's young, he's very smart, he's dynamic, he's done absolutely fantastic things in the country. So there's a bit of rivalry there. But I think, the new administration there won't be any problems. I know that Don Jr. has been to El Salvador and met with the president. You have Matt Gaetz has been there more than once. He's actually buying property there. There's now an El Salvador caucus in Washington, D.C., which will be very active. And so I think this whole past week will be forgotten. I kind of amplified it a bit just because I thought that it would cause a little drama, which why not?
Right.
You know, that's kind of what I'm good at anyway, you know, like stir the pot a little bit and without getting thrown out or arrested. You know, that's always the challenge for me, is to stay out of jail or, you know, so I think that all went okay.
So you were someone that I originally started studying 15 years ago, and so I've seen a lot of the rants and, you know, like you said, things that you're good at. However, there is an element to what you do, the truth, and what most people aren't willing to do is truly, like that's where I was going with standing up, picking up your cross, and laying down your life. Most people are not willing to do that at all. Most people want to save their life, and they will shun their values, shun their principles, shun those things in order to live another day, whatever it is. You have put your neck on the line over and over and over and over again.
HSBC, there's nothing there except a lie. It's traded on the FTSE as a lie. If you want to invest in a lie, buy it. Buy it. It's a lie. It's a lie. It's a lie. They're lying. There's nothing there. It's a piece of dirt. You buy that stock, you're buying financial terrorism. Don't you understand that? Do you value your children at all? Or do you want to see them sent to a concentration camp? Wait, I forgot. Dancing with the Stars is on. Never mind.
What is that in you that makes you do that or feel compelled to do that? Or is it just, again, your personality, things that happened to you growing up? That's always fascinating me about you, most people will not do that. And that's a fact, but you are for so long. Why?
I think it boils down to one word: authenticity. So for my whole life, even when I was a teenager and growing up, I often really sought authenticity. And I'll give you an early example. So when I was growing up in Westchester County, New York, I used to listen to a radio station called WRVR out of New York City. It was a jazz station. And on that station, I heard for the first time Gil Scott-Heron, who is a spoken word poet at the time, you know, predecessor to rap. There was Gil Scott-Heron, you know, and the last poets. And I listened to his song, My Sister Nell Got Bit by a Rat in Whitey's on the Moon. And I'm like a teenager in my suburban bedroom affluent community. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? And when I moved to New York a couple of years later to go to NYU, you know, I moved to Harlem. I moved to 145th Street to find Gil Scott-Heron because I understood he lived in Harlem. And I lived in Harlem for 4 years. And it was, you know, uptown in the Sugar Hill area in the fucking ghetto. And I learned about authenticity in the ghetto. Like, if you can't be authentic, you get sussed out, and that's dangerous.
Yes.
Like, the way to put a shield around you to protect you is to be authentic. And that means you have to, if you're a freak, you have to be your authentic freaky self. You can't hide behind any masks at all. And that is a lesson that I really sought to learn, you know, that I couldn't learn in any other way, you know. And being young, I felt like I just wasn't really, you know, had much to lose. You know, I was very interested in all of this culture, and I had heard about Harlem, you know, my whole life, and I was very interested in music and jazz and things. And then one day on television was Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan was giving a speech which was, "It's morning in America again."
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years.
And at that time, I'd been living uptown for 4 years, and I had basically gone feral. Like, I was like a street guy. I mean, I was going to NYU, but I was just a party animal, really, for 24/7, uptown, downtown, anywhere. You know, it's just like in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. And it was really a great time to, you know, punk rock was starting at CBGB's downtown. And I was a DJ at WNYU at the college radio station, so we were friendly with all the acts and all the clubs and all the bands, and we hung out with all the bands, and we hung out at all the jazz clubs uptown. And so, but I heard this Ronald Reagan speech, but I had run myself down to a degree. Like I wasted my entire college career because I just was like always out running around and partying and listening to bands and stuff. And I felt like, oh, I'm going to be graduating soon, and I really have completely wasted my entire career in college, and I'm doomed. And so I heard this speech by Ronald Reagan. He's on TV saying there's morning in America again. So as it so happened to be the case, one of my part-time jobs during that era to keep myself going, my rent was $140 on 145th Street in Broadway. And you could live in New York City for $20 a day. I could pay rent. I could eat, pizza is $1 slice, falafel is $1 a slice, a tray bag of good weed, $3 will last you several days, right? Mm-hmm. And you could just live and have a fabulous time. And but one of the part-time jobs that I had, I ended up working, just picking up a job on a Wall Street brokerage firm with a broker, doing what's called cold calling, the same job that Peter Schiff started his career doing, just dialing. And when I walked into this office at Payne Weber on 140 Broadway, which is just 2 blocks from Wall Street, I just fell in love with everything there. And it was a complete different, totally it's the authentic, this authentic meme, struck me like, I felt like a certain familiarity with it, I guess because I was basically a snot from the suburbs anyway. So it's like, wow, these people, I really like the suits and the ties here, and everyone's making all this money. So this is 1983, and suddenly this bull market on Wall Street started. So the guy who I was working for, he said, well, we can get you set up with a license in 3 or 4 months. You can get on the phone and be a stockbroker. Yeah. So that's exactly what I did. So I stayed on Wall Street for 8 years, from 82 to 1990, and I made a fuck ton of money. And all the bad habits I had up until that time that I started on Wall Street became worse because now I added money. So then in 1990, another big change, kind of on the theme of authenticity, and we're kind of trying to just throw yourself into situations that are foreign to you, but finding something within yourself that's authentic that allows you to survive and maybe even thrive. So in 1990, I went to Paris to see a friend, to go to a party, and I arrived in Paris in 1990, and I fell in love with Paris. I felt like I had been lied to my whole life, that this beautiful city existed, and I didn't really know about it the way that it struck me as being so beautiful and so spectacular. So I ended up 2 weeks, became 2 months, and then I said, fuck it. I called in my resignation, I sold my business, and I stayed in Paris for 5 years, doing nothing, because I had saved up a bunch of money and I wasn't needing to work. So I just lived in Paris and in France and in Europe, and just met people, and again try to be my authentic self, and that was all I had to go with because I didn't know French, I didn't know anybody. But if you allow your true character to be seen, people gravitate to that. If you are constantly behind a mask, or you're trying to please somebody, or trying to fill someone else's expectation, you'll never experience that kind of direct one-on-one relationship with people, right? And that is generally the greatest thing anyone can experience, is having a relationship with other people. People and humans are a very advanced species here on planet Earth, and they're very interesting. But in order to communicate with them, you really have to get rid of all the artifice and try to find, and it was easier, in the long time ago. The modern technology has obfuscated our souls. So I lived there for 5 years. Then I get a call one day from my friend from NYU, who I hadn't talked to in years, Alec Baldwin, who was an actor, famous actor at that point. he had married Kim Basinger. He said, oh, my wife Kim's coming to Paris to do a movie called Pret-a-Porter for Robert Altman, and I want to come see you and hang out. So he showed up, and he was there for 6-7 weeks, and we were just hanging out all day. I showed him a treatment for a film I had written just, on one of my unbusy days at the cafe. And he's like, wow, this would be a great vehicle for me and my brother Billy. So he called up Harvey Weinstein at Miramax, and by the next day they had bought this treatment for a script idea for a lot of money. And Alec was like, oh, I gotta go, I'm going back to Hollywood, we're gonna make this movie. And if you want to come to LA and be a producer. So I went back to where I was living, and I'm like, oh, well, you know what, that might be interesting. So I went to LA, didn't know anybody except Alec, and I once again relied on just being myself to see how that would go. And they did not make that movie because, as what the case, many times in Los Angeles, movies go into turnaround after a certain period of time, where the studios will put them up for sale to anybody who wants to buy the project for the amount of money they have invested in the project. Miramax would do this all the time. They're trying to create lots and lots of projects. But I did hook up with another friend of mine who I knew from Wall Street, Michael Burns, who was running over there at Prudential Securities. And I said, Michael, I've been here 2 weeks in Los Angeles, and it's the most boring town I've ever been in. I look at Variety magazine, and I see all these movies, and I see the box office number, and it's worth X number of billions of dollars, and I'm like, so there's a box office futures contract for studios to hedge their exposure, right? He's like, no. Like, really? Why don't we create one? So we started to make a box office futures contract, and then at that time something came along called the internet. This was in the mid-90s. So I said, why don't we create a virtual stock market and trade virtual movies and virtual stars? So this became the Hollywood Stock Exchange, which I started in 1996. I created the technology called the Virtual Specialist Technology. It's patented. 5950176 is the patent number. And we launched it. It became very popular, very successful, got 1 million users. And then in 2000, 2001, you had a dot-com crash. We sold it to Cantor Fitzgerald. Cantor Fitzgerald moved the entire operation to the top floor of the World Trade Center 3 weeks before 9/11. It then got 9/11. I had already banked my check, and I had gone back to France. And I was living in the south of France. And I was in the south of France for 2 years, and then I walked into a cafe, and the owner said, Max, meet Stacy. I met Stacy for the first time. She turned around, I looked at her, and I'm like, wow, this is the woman that I've been looking for 20 years, really. This is I know I'm going to be marrying this woman. I knew it right away. And then I've been with Stacy since 2003. And so then the story is more familiar to people who follow our content. We started doing Al Jazeera English, and I did a show on Press TV for 4 years called On the Edge with Max Keiser. We did a BBC show called The Oracle with Max Keiser. We did, of course, Keiser Report on RT for 13 years. And we do the Orange Pill podcast, but that's all been with Stacy. Stacy had been doing TV and films in London at the BBC. She was similar to me in that we were both expatriates, but she was in London, I was in Paris. So when you're an expat, you develop a certain type of personality, if you will, that we kind of meshed right away on that because you're always basically a foreigner, in somebody else's land, and it's intriguing and it's kind of interesting, and so that takes us pretty much up to the present. So to answer the question about taking chances or taking risks or putting myself out there, you have to put yourself out there every day or you're not living, right? That's what life is. If you're hiding, you're not living. So you need to put yourself out there, your authentic self, whatever that may be. And Bitcoin, as I say, is the magic mirror that exposes you to yourself. If you are not really that great character, Bitcoin will make you worse. And if you're basically a good character, Bitcoin will make you a better person. And Andreas Antonopoulos was a guy who was already a very soulful guy who had other people's interests at heart. And he became a great educator and was a great guy for an orange-pilled many people. Michael Saylor, similarly, Bitcoin took a very successful businessman and made him really an educator and a leader, and he's become a phenomenal success. That's Bitcoin has boosted what was already there. If you're Craig Wright, you're already cracked to begin with, and you're now going to prison. If you're a Do Kwon, you're already a crook from the moment you came out of your mother's womb. Now you're going to prison, right? So it reflects who you are, it accelerates who you are, and this is the thing about Bitcoin we all need to understand, is that the day of reckoning is coming, and you need to be right with Satoshi. Otherwise, you're going to get crushed by Satoshi. Okay? Donald Trump was making a speech about America, and the contrast to RFK is that RFK said, we're going to put Bitcoin on our balance sheet. That's great, because that's what you need to do in World War Bitcoin. If you don't have Bitcoin, you're going to get beaten by Bitcoin. Just like when gunpowder came around, if you didn't have gunpowder, you were taken over by those forces that did have gunpowder. And this is what I think is underestimated by most people, is the importance of Bitcoin in this current environment where fiat money is going to be evaporated completely and go to nothing. Gold's being demonetized. Society is crumbling. The nation state model is crumbling. The central banks are crumbling. And Bitcoin is your ticket to sanity. I'll finish with one last thing, which is that I started tweeting recently about my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous. So in 1988, I started in AA, so I'm celebrating 36 years, the 30th of July, as a matter of fact, so coming up in 3 days, it'll be 36 years. So in AA, you come with an alcohol addiction, but to stay sober is a spiritual journey. And similarly with Bitcoin, you come for number go up, but it's really, it becomes a spiritual journey, in my opinion, the way I see it, and I've seen it now longer than most, right? And I've seen a lot of things come and go, and I've experienced many things in the Bitcoin world, and I really see it overlapping the alcoholics, my journey in recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous as well. So again, getting back to authenticity, sobriety allowed me to be more of my authentic self. Bitcoin does the same thing. I feel alive, and I can always feel more alive. I'm talking to you, I'm talking to people out here. I like meeting people and hearing what they're up to, because that energizes me, because nothing's more interesting than other human beings. That's my answer.
Yeah, that's incredible. Two more quick ones, and I know I want to be cognizant of your time. Why, going back to kind of why I was saying this, you're willing to give this your background and why it is. And I think everyone's personality is different, right? Not everyone's made to stand on stage and speak truth. Have there been times that you've been afraid to say what you're about to say? And you're like, I know there's a lot of powerful men with weapons that might not like what I'm about to say. Have there been times where you just said, this has to be said regardless? Have there been times where you've been afraid to say what you were about to say?
Yeah, a few times. I mean, the thing about talking about finance and banks is that there's no risk. I mean, you can say Jamie Dimon's a cunt, and Jamie Dimon won't care, because they can always print more money, right? So, I mean, when you attack the banks and you attack the central banks, they do not care. But when I said on Al Jazeera that I declared a fatwa on Al Jazeera against Hank Paulson during the 2008 crisis, and said that his head should bounce down the Capitol stairs in Washington, D.C., right? I said I was trying to trigger Salman Rushdie on a U.S. official on Al Jazeera English. I mean, that was probably one of the dicier moments in my broadcasting career. And the response was from Al Jazeera. They invited me back the next week, and they said, we'll have you back to talk about stuff. Please don't issue any fatwas. That was their request. But when you're talking about the finance world, literally, they don't care. The times that I have veered into other areas in energy and defense or military spending. Okay, the most journalist murders are environmental journalists covering the energy industry. Every year, many get murdered, and if I don't cover that area, for that reason. It's too dangerous. It's too dangerous. Also, military contractors. I make jokes about them, etc. But I don't do an expose like on Rockwell or Boeing. Like I would never go out there and say, an insider told me Boeing, is selling faulty equipment or something like that, because they would fucking kill me. They kill people.
Yeah.
Right. That's so. Yes. So it sounds like, oh, I'm saying stuff that is, could potentially be trouble. But, if it's in finance, nobody cares, is what I'm saying. I never felt ever at risk saying anything about people in the finance business. But in the oil or energy sector or the defense military contracting sector, it's definitely another story. Look at Julian Assange. He posts video of the U.S. industrial complex killing people from a helicopter, and he just went through this harsh ordeal, and he now is free, thank goodness. But that's not for me. So I mean, I have my guardrails that I wouldn't. On the finance side and on the Bitcoin side, I bring enough interest to it, and I think that's the solution for it. I think that's the answer to it. I think everyone benefits from it. So I'm happy to stay there, but it's not like I think I'm Teflon and that nothing can hurt me. That's why I stay away from areas that I know would be dangerous for me.
Well, that's fascinating. Really quickly on Bucky Fuller. I know you're a student of Bucky Fuller.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm a student of Bucky Fuller, but I've studied his work. I've read his books, and he's a guy who exemplifies this attitude that we're talking about authenticity. He made the decision very early on in his career that he was only going to do things that would help humanity as a whole. So he did the geodesic dome, and he invented the electric car. And so he was selflessly pursuing science and engineering and architecture for the benefit of humanity. And he made that decision as a very young man. Yeah. And he stuck to that because that's who he was. And he stayed true to who he was. And he created the Buckminster Fuller as we know him, and a fantastic legacy. And I think that's a good example. Philosophically, we've heard since Socrates to know thyself, right? This is actually one of the most difficult things anyone can undertake, is self-knowledge, to go into one's self and to look critically at oneself, and to accept oneself. I mean, part of the sobriety story is to acceptance is a big word you see in AA meetings and in sobriety, and a lot of it is accepting yourself. Accepting the fact that you have made a mess of things initially when you begin, and you need to at least acknowledge that to begin with, that you have made this mess, acknowledge this, and to go from that starting point. But I'd say Buckminster Fuller is like that. A lot of my favorite artists or musicians, and I'm always looking for stuff that I think just pops because it's authentic, and that energizes me because I'm trained I don't know if the word is trained myself, but I've opened myself up to having my preconceptions challenged all the time, because they're always changing. Biases and preconceptions, ideologies are very limiting. In economics, we've had only a few schools of economics. Keynesian, Austrian, socialism, capitalism, right? So really, Bitcoin is a new chapter in economics. It's a new chapter in money. And for people who spent their whole life studying economics and money, are they willing to say everything they've learned up until that point is wrong? No, they're not willing to say that. Very few. Yes. Maybe two or three. For me, because I've been reluctant to get too monolithic in what I do and stick with something for too long and become too rigid in my thinking. Bitcoin comes around, and I'm allowing it to, like I said, I wrote the phrase, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you, right? So that came from a conference called Crypto Springs in Palm Springs, California, and this woman comes up to me and she just found out about Bitcoin and here's how she can make it better. And like I've heard this now from many people over years. I'm like, look, you don't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin changes you, right? And it's just like, that's it. That. And I only mention that because a lot of people use that phrase and I get no accreditation. Like so much of the intellectual property in this industry, I never get credit for. I mean, Michael Saylor, half the shit he says, I said first, okay? The other half is from Trace Mayer, okay? And I stole Trace Mayer shit, okay? So it's Trace Mayer, Max, and then Michael Saylor. But, he doesn't give accreditation? No, I don't know what's up with that. But anyway, it's all good because we're on the same pilgrimage to the Bitcoin singularity when we join with Satoshi. And the whole concept of money is redefined in our global unconscious minds, and violence is demonetized absolutely. And then what's left when you remove violence is love. So we're having that spontaneous global Bitcoin hashing orgasm, as I call it, where we just fucking come hard. Every 8 billion people have a simultaneous orgasm. Imagine that. I mean, even the aliens would like, fuck, I'm getting in on this shit.
They're in.
They'd be flying in. Your sound man's falling asleep. Look at that. He's wandering. He's like over there looking over there. He's like, what the hell is this guy going on about? You told me I'd be talking to Bitcoiners. This guy's a nutter.
Last question. I feel like by the way, that one thing is what you really, probably 4 or 5 years ago, really orange-pilled me. Might have been my real inflection point after studying 15 years ago, Robert Kiyosaki, many people, but really understanding Bitcoin probably 5 years ago was the love part. So removing war. That's probably one of the most impactful things, I believe, when you're talking to somebody about it. And I feel like we also answered the question I was going to ask you, what keeps people in the matrix? However, I feel like we've kind of asked that. You can touch on it if you want, but the last question, just game theory. It feels like between what happened, we saw here this week, obviously, in the last couple of months with the United States, obviously what you're doing in El Salvador, we see Bhutan, right? We see all these different things going on. It feels like we're on the precipice of massive adoption. I mean, what are your, again, we're trying to mind read 8 billion people and what's happening in the world, so I know I don't want to do that necessarily, but what do you think the next 5 years looks like, the next 10 years looks like, when you kind of look out and say, holy cow, like we are on something massive. The President of the United States just came and talked about lines of code. Like you said, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. He was forced to come here. All these people are forced to come here, right? So what do you see? Is this just exponentially speeding up? It seems that way. What are your thoughts?
Well, the key word there is exponential, right? The network effect and the doubling effect that happens every year or every however many months, like Moore's Law or something, Bitcoin's doubling effect, the network effect. And we saw with the internet. So the internet in the 90s was bouncing around and we got to like 300 million users. And then around 1997, I believe, Netscape went public. And that was the moment that suddenly went up to 1 billion, 2 billion users. Okay, and with the network effect doubled, and doubled again. So you went 300 million, 600 million, 1.2 billion. Boom, boom, boom. 4 billion, 5 billion. So that's I think we're at that Netscape moment in 2024.
Feels like that.
So I think a year from now, we're going to have triple the users. We'll have Bitcoin at 300, 400,000 a coin. We'll have people are pulled into it. It's like a black hole, if you will. All value, everything goes to zero against Bitcoin in terms of purchasing power. So that means not only fiat money, but stocks, bonds, commercial real estate, fine art, gold. Gold gets demonetized. I mean, Trump did mention gold, and silver. And I mean, that's a target that you're going for. And the number go up component of Bitcoin is very compelling because people are inherently, greedy might be too strong a word, but I think it's, like I've said before, Bitcoin is sent by God for humans to unfuck their money. So the greed portion of our character as human beings is a little over tweaked. You know, it served a purpose, maybe more. It was more utilitarian in our previous hunter-gatherer existence. Yeah. You know, but when you can print money and then buy institutions and buy media and things, okay, now you see what's happened to the culture and society. It's become extremely decadent, and it's collapsing in many ways. So, you know, God is like, I added too much greed in that planet there, in universe 12B/9 in the multiverse of God. It's like, I gotta come up with a patch. You know, didn't I send my son down here? What the fuck? What happened to that? Well, you did what? You fucking crucified him? What are you, fucking morons? He's just trying to tell you about love.
Oh, man.
So then he's like, oh, man, maybe I should just let these assholes die. Well, I don't know. Well, I'll give him one more shot. Send him Bitcoin. Are you sure, boss? Yeah, we'll give him another shot. Send him down some Bitcoin. Yeah, some cypherpunks. We'll see what happens. Oh, there's my friend. How are you? Good to see you. How about you? Good. So he sends down the Bitcoin, and that's where we're at now. And hopefully, the patch works. You know, we hit the Bitcoin singularity, and there's Satoshi waiting for us because, you know, Bitcoin comes from the future. That's why no one knows the author of the white paper, is because it came from the future. We'll discover the author in the future because the author lives in the future. I mean, why don't we know who authored the white paper? I mean, I don't know. Nobody knows who authored the actual white paper. I mean, it's a handwriting sample. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Almost any handwriting sample in the world, or written word sample, you can do a search and find out where it comes from, right? Well, how did this one elude so many people? There's a few clues in terms of time zone and some phrases that are used, and you kind of end up maybe geographically here. But it's incredible to me that we do not actually know the actual author of the white paper. The only thing we do know for sure that it's not Craig White, right? Yeah. That's the only thing we know guaranteed for sure. But so, and my conclusion is that it's because it was written in the future. And so Bitcoin is a ladder to the future. You know, the block, the height, the block height is essentially this ladder that's going into the Bitcoin singularity, into the future, and you know, redefining time, energy, and so as a species we have that singularity, and that's where we're headed. You know, this reunion with ourselves. We get to know who we are in the end. That's the end of the story. Is you are who you are. That's the end. So all the gurus and the mystics already tell you that. You say, you are who you are. That's the secret of life. Authenticity. Right? It's authenticity. There you go. Yeah. Okay? So that's why I'm Max Keiser, the ratings riser. And wherever I go, ratings go higher. I simply exude content 24/7. And, you know, every single one of these that's ever been printed throughout history goes to zero. Now, Bitcoin only means that it's going to go there faster and permanently. There will never be, anybody will never attempt to do this again, create this paper Ponzi scheme ever again once we go into the Bitcoin standard. Okay?
Done.
And, you know,
it's beautiful.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Max. Max Keiser.
Yep.
A true playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. That's for damn sure. So thank you so much, Max.
Don't let your kids touch this shit. Okay, this is a venereal disease that came out of Jay Powell's asshole. It's fucking dangerous, toxic shit.
Going after the finance guy.
Don't let anybody anywhere near this shit. It's terrible. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Max.
Thank you for checking out this episode of the Playable Characters Show, brought to you by Bitcoin Trading Cards. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the future Bitcoin and financial experts we have on the show. Plus, we will be doing random big giveaways throughout different moments of shows of collectible cards, sats, merch, and more from guests, so you won't miss anything. This show does not constitute any investment advice, only freedom advice. Everything you see here is opinions from the host and the guests themselves, nothing further. Please don't trust, verify. For full transparency, I do lead marketing efforts at Bitcoin Trading Cards, where we are trying to spread freedom to all of humanity and orange pill the world, one collectible physical trading card at a time, by making things fun and easy to talk about that normally make you want to cry. You can reach me directly through my email, brandon@btc-cards.com, with any inquiries or playable character suggestions. See you on the next one.